We often carry our lives like a heavy stone, believing that the weight we feel is the essence of who we are. Every scar, every rejection, and every moment of inadequacy seems to cling to a central core we call the self. We spend decades trying to polish this self, to protect it from the world, and to heal the wounds it has gathered along the way. Yet, what if the very thing we are trying to protect is the source of the pain itself? The Buddha offered a perspective that challenges our most fundamental assumption, the idea of anatta, or non-self. This is not a denial of your existence, but a liberation from the illusion of a fixed, permanent identity that must be defended at all costs. By understanding that there is no solid core to be wounded, we find the ultimate path to healing. To understand why we suffer so deeply, we must first look at the biological roots of the ego through the lens of our evolutionary history. For millions of years, our ancestors lived in a world of constant physical threat where the ability to distinguish between self and other was a matter of life and death. The brain evolved to be a survival machine, constantly drawing boundaries and creating a narrative of a central protagonist who must be protected. This sense of a solid self was a brilliant evolutionary shortcut, allowing us to navigate social hierarchies, secure resources, and ensure our genes continued into the next generation. However, this same mechanism that kept us alive in the wild has become a source of profound psychological distress in the modern world. We no longer just fear the predator in the grass. We fear the perceived threat to our social status, our self-image, and our personal story. We have become prisoners of a biological ghost, an internal narrator that insists everything happening in the universe is about us. When someone insults us, we do not just hear sound waves. We feel a direct hit to a core that we believe is permanent and real. This belief in a solid self acts like a target on our chest. The larger the ego, the larger the target, and the more likely we are to be wounded by the inevitable arrows of life. We spend our energy building high walls around this phantom self, trying to make it invulnerable. Yet the walls themselves are what trap us in a state of constant defense. We are exhausted by the effort of maintaining a reputation, a career, and a personality that we think defines us. The Buddha recognized that this drive for survival has overreached its purpose, creating a psychological architecture that is inherently unstable. We are trying to find security in something that is fundamentally fluid, like trying to build a house on the surface of a moving river. The inner wounds we carry are often just the friction between our desire for a permanent self and the reality of a changing world. We feel broken because we believe there is a thing to be broken. We feel lost because we believe there is a thing to be lost. If we can begin to see that the self is not a solid object but a shifting process, the target begins to dissolve. The pain may still arrive, but there is no longer a fixed point for it to stick to. This is the beginning of true resilience, not by making the self stronger, but by seeing through the illusion of its solidity entirely. We are not the protagonists of a tragic drama. We are the vast space in which the drama unfolds. When we look closely at what we call the self, we find that it is actually a collection of changing parts rather than a single entity. The Buddha described this through the 5 aggregates, which are the different layers of our experience that we mistake for a soul or a permanent identity. First, there is the physical body, which is constantly aging, shedding cells, and transforming. We cannot find a permanent self in the bones or the blood because they are in a state of perpetual flux. Second, there are our feelings, the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations that arise and vanish within seconds. We often say, "I am sad" or "I am happy," but in reality, there is only sadness or happiness passing through the field of awareness. Third, there is perception, the way our mind labels and interprets the world based on past conditioning. Fourth, there are mental formations, our thoughts, habits, and reactions that have been carved into our psyche over time. Finally, there is consciousness, the quality of being aware of all these other processes. When we analyze these 5 layers, we see that none of them are under our complete control, and none of them are permanent. If you cannot control your thoughts or your aging body, how can you claim they are you? Modern psychology echoes this by showing how the brain creates a unified sense of self out of fragmented sensory data. It is like a movie projected on a screen, where 24 still frames per second create the illusion of continuous motion. We are so caught up in the story on the screen that we forget there is no actual person moving inside the light. This realization of impermanence is the key to healing our inner wounds. Most of our psychological trauma is held together by a narrative of what happened to me in the past. We carry the weight of an old version of ourselves that no longer exists, clinging to the memory of a wound as if it were a permanent part of our anatomy. But if the self is a process, then the person who was wounded 10 years ago is not the same person standing here today. The cells have changed, the thoughts have changed, and the consciousness has moved on. We are like a river that is never the same from one moment to the next. By deconstructing the self into these changing parts, we begin to see that our suffering is not a solid block of granite, but a swirling cloud of mist. We can observe the pain without becoming the pain. We can acknowledge the memory without being defined by it. This analytical approach does not dismiss our experiences, but it places them in a wider context where they lose their power to crush us. We find a strange and beautiful freedom in realizing that we are not the story we have been telling ourselves. The modern world tells us that the way to heal is to build a better version of ourselves. We are bombarded with messages about self-improvement, self-care, and self-esteem. Yet all of these concepts still revolve around the same central illusion of a permanent me that needs to be perfected. We are essentially trying to paint a ghost, hoping that if we use enough bright colors, the ghost will finally become solid and safe. This is the great irony of the human condition, that our very attempts to heal the self often reinforce the structures of our suffering. When we focus intensely on our personal healing, we are often just tightening the grip of the ego on its own narrative of victimhood or achievement. The Buddha's critique of this approach is radical because it suggests that the problem is not that the self is broken. The problem is the belief in the self itself. Think of the energy it takes to maintain a reputation or to defend your opinions in an argument. That tension you feel in your chest is the physical manifestation of attachment to a phantom. We are like actors who have forgotten we are playing a role and have become terrified that the character might die on stage. But if there is no fixed self, then there is nothing to defend and nothing to lose. When you no longer have to protect a fragile ego, you are free to respond to the world with total honesty and spontaneity. You can listen to criticism without collapsing because the criticism is not hitting a solid core. It is just passing through space. You can experience failure without feeling like a failure because you recognize that failure is just a temporary event in a stream of changing conditions. The wounds of the past lose their grip when there is no longer a permanent victim to hold on to them. We see that our anger, our shame, and our pride are all just weather patterns in the sky of awareness. This shift in perspective is the most profound psychological surgery one can undergo. It cuts through the root of anxiety by revealing that the thing we are most afraid of losing, our identity, was never there to begin with. We have been holding our breath for a lifetime, trying to keep a bubble from popping, only to realize that we are the air both inside and outside the bubble. In the absence of a self to protect, compassion becomes our natural state because the barriers between us and the world have dissolved. We no longer see others as threats to our ego, but as fellow travelers caught in the same web of illusion. This is the true meaning of an unshakable mind. Not a mind that is hard like a rock, but a mind that is open like the wind. Applying the wisdom of non-self to our daily lives is not about escaping into a cave or denying our humanity. It is about bringing a new quality of clarity to everything we do. In our work, we often struggle with burnout because our ego is too heavily invested in the outcome. We want the credit, we fear the blame, and we compare our progress to everyone else. When we apply anatta, work becomes a selfless flow of action. We do the task for the sake of the task. And because the ego is not standing in the way, our creativity and efficiency actually increase. We are no longer performing for an audience in our head. We are simply participating in the movement of life. In our relationships, the teaching of non-self transforms how we love. Most of what we call love is actually a form of egoic possession where we want the other person to fulfill our needs and validate our identity. This creates a cycle of dependency and conflict. But when we see that there is no solid self to be completed by another, love becomes a spacious and generous offering. We can see the other person as they truly are, without the filters of our own expectations and fears. We can forgive more easily because we realize that the person who hurt us was also acting out of their own conditioning and the illusion of their own selfhood. There is no one to hold a grudge against, and no one to keep the grudge alive. This awareness also changes how we handle our internal dialogue. Instead of fighting our thoughts or trying to suppress our emotions, we simply observe them as impersonal phenomena. When a wave of anxiety arises, we do not say, "I am anxious." We say there is a feeling of anxiety arising. This small shift in language reflects a massive shift in consciousness. It creates the space necessary for the emotion to move through us without leaving a scar. We become like a mountain that remains still while the seasons change around it. This is the ultimate form of inner strength training. It is a resilience that does not come from effort or willpower, but from the deep realization of our true nature as an interconnected process rather than a separate thing. We begin to move through the world with a light touch, no longer burdened by the need to be someone special or to achieve some permanent state of perfection. We find that when we stop trying to be a self, we finally have the room to be truly alive. Every moment becomes an opportunity to practice this letting go, turning the mundane details of life into a path of liberation. The path of anatta is not a destination we reach. It is a way of seeing that we carry with us into every breath. It is the quiet courage to look into the mirror and recognize that the face looking back is a beautiful, temporary dance of the elements. By releasing the heavy burden of the self, we find that the wounds we thought were permanent have nowhere to land. We are healed not by becoming whole, but by realizing we were never broken in the way we imagined. The silence that remains is not empty. It is full of a peace that the world can neither give nor take away. Walk forward with this truth, and let the world move through you like light through glass.